Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good day, good evening for everyone that was watching this ITC webinar at the second semester of 2025. My name is Felipe Valentini. I'm from professor here in Brazil and also member of the Council of the International Test Commission. And in this webinar today, we have two guests, one from South Africa and one from Brazil. And we are talking about test regulation. In this webinar, Pakeezah from South Africa will discuss South Africa's shifts from testing quality evaluation to classification and the role of ASSA in safeguarding psychometric standards, while Ariela from Brazil will present Brazilian's SATEPSI system, which regulates and ensures the scientific, ethical, and technological quality of psychological tests. Together, they offer a comparative view of different regulatory approaches worldwide. So thank you so much, Ariela and Paki, for being here today. It's a great pleasure for the ITC community to receive you here on this webinar, to listen what you have to say about the test regulation and the importance of those regulations to the quality in terms of examination and testing. Thank you so much. So I would like to first invite Pakeezah Rajab from South Africa to speak about the South Africa system. Dr. Pakeezah Rajab is a research psychologist and psychometrician specializing in executive function across the lifespan, academic and employee performance, and psychometric test development and evaluation. Since 2016, she has been a senior research on the product and research team at GVR Africa Group. She also serves on the Executive Council of Psychological Society in South Africa, contributing to its research and methodologies and registered counsel in psychometric divisions. So thank you so much, Paki, for being here today. I'd now like to mention that Pakeezah and Ariela, they are both members of the Early Career Program. They are awarded in the last ITC conference in Granada last year to receive the award of the Early Career. So thank you so much for being here today, you both. And we start over with Paki. Thank you so much, Paki.
Thank you so much, Prof. Philippe. Good day, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for being here with us. We received quite a number of questions, so I think both Ariela and I have tried answering some of them in our presentations, but please also comment, and we'll try to answer as much as possible, if not in our presentations, once we are done with our presentations. So yes, I think Prof. Philippe told all of our marketing has shared the topic quite nicely, test quality around the world. And I think we are at a stage where we all know that there is a need that we are building and developing, adapting assessments that really serve our people, not serving businesses, not serving governments necessarily, not serving financial sense, but doing what's right by our people. Across the world, whether you're sitting where I am in the southern tip of Africa or anywhere else, we all are asking, there's so much literature that's trying to answer this. How do we ensure that the tests that we are using, it can be psychometric tests, it can be educational tests, it can be clinical tests. How are we using tests that are acceptable, accessible, scientifically sound, and do no harm to our communities? I think we all have a little bit of a history of assessments and scores being used to harm people or to change law and legislation to hurt individuals. But how can we, and I think we all are at a point where we're all asking this question, how can we ensure that our testing is doing no harm? And then I think it would be nice maybe if you can put it in the comments section, but also if you don't, that's fine. Just to reflect, who is ensuring taste quality in your country? Is it your government that has some control over this? Do you maybe have a professional body that is covering it? Market regulations. So maybe your country only has a small variety of tests that can be used. I don't think so. I think all of us are now have access to global assessments. But who is assuring that this test actually works for your people? Is it only practitioners? What do you mean by practitioners? Do you have to be a psychologist? Do you have to have a certain qualification to use a test? Are the public choosing the test? I like this assessment. There are many popular names out there. The public saying that this is a good test, I want to use this test, I want to be assessed on this test. Or is it anything goes? Is it if it's a free assessment that you find on Facebook or Instagram that tells you that your personality is like a panda? Is that a good test? And is that doing harm and actually serving your people? Who in your country is actually looking at test quality? So between today, we're going to cover different ways of actually who's ensuring test quality. I'm going to start with South Africa, and we've taken a little bit of like a government professional body and a practitioner approach that I would like to cover today. I think before I go straight into the nitty gritty of test regulation, if you want to, South Africa, a little bit about us, a little bit about our history. I think I have a very, very vibrant color and picture there on the right-hand side, and that really is reflective of us as a country. As many colors you are seeing on screen is as diverse as our country is, as interesting and different as our people are, as I'm sure is the rest of the world as well. But South Africa, globally, we are known as a rainbow nation, and you can see it in our national flag. If you travel, you can see it in our beauty from a natural perspective. I'm sure you're all familiar with Table Mountain, which I have there on screen. But across, I think our country is so vibrant and diverse, but our people are just as diverse. Diverse talents, diverse cultures, diverse languages. So we have 12 official languages that, according to legislation, we have 12, with sign language actually be coming on as our 12th language. But we have so many more, so even more unofficial languages. We do see, however, that English, it is a predominant language in the country. Most of our citizens can speak English. And when you enter the workplace in particular, English tends to dominate. Most of our legal documentation, our employee contracts are in English. But nevertheless, I think that then comes with multilingual and multicultural adaptation challenges, as I'm sure many of us are faced with. You assessing somebody for a job. Are we then going to compare this person to the global norm, to the South African norm? Within South Africa, because we have so many languages, so many cultures, are we just going to compare them to a South African norm, or are we going to compare them to a language specific or ethnic specific norm? And there's arguments for both, like I'm sure in the rest of the world. But sometimes the argument in South Africa is that absolutely, yes, we do need to use cultural norms or language specific norms for our population because of our history. I think many on the call are aware of our apartheid history, where our black populations were unfairly discriminated against. So sometimes, that there is that need or request that especially our previously disadvantaged groups be compared to a norm that looks at the previously disadvantaged. The other argument against that, though, is that are we not further encouraging that divide? Let's leave our history behind us now. Let's not further that divide by continuing to see differences in white and black or previously disadvantaged and not. Let's rather use one norm. And that is often a challenge that many of our practitioners are faced with. Another challenge is that because of that history, apartheid only really was disregarded or became illegal in 1994, and so we 30 years or so, 31 years into a democracy, and in the bigger scheme, that's not a lot of time to really allow for systematic change. And because of that, we do find that the socioeconomic challenges of those previously disadvantaged people we are still seeing today. Because of those socioeconomic challenges, we also see a technological divide, that not everybody is comfortable or computer literate. We have AI, and so many questions came through on AI as well. Are we ready as a profession, but also as a country, for all of these AI changes? We're not quite sure yet, and really thank you to bodies like ITC for helping with guidelines that demarcate really the value of AI, but also that yes, even if you are implementing AI, it still needs to show the psychometric properties. It still needs to be fair, reliable, and valid. But from a South African perspective, because of our history, and assessments actually were used in the past as proof that a certain ethnicity was superior to others, our law today is very nervous or conscious about that. And because of that, if we are using psychometric assessments, we need to show that it's reliable, valid, and fair legally. Like it's in our law that psychometric tests need to be reliable, fair, and valid. So we have the Health Professions Council of South Africa. They are a statutory body created in line with our Health Professions Act. So law says that we need a body like the HPCSA. I'm going to call them that. To say that whole name every time is just too long. The role of the HPCSA after apartheid and once this act mandated them to be around was that they overlooked assessments for a very long time, and that overlooking included classifying it. So is it a psychological test or not? And then evaluating its scientific integrity. A few years ago, due to legal changes, that mandate changed. So as of now, and has been for a few years, the role of the HPCSA is to legally classify a psychological test. What that means is that according to their mandate, every year they publish a document with all of the tests that have been classified as psychological, and then only practitioners who are registered with them as a psychologist or a health practitioner can actually use those tests that's on that list. So the point of that form is, one, to protect the scope of practice so that not any HR practitioner or teacher or GP or anybody can use a test that is clearly psychological, but it's also protecting the public in that, if it's not on that list, then it's probably not a psychological test. So you shouldn't be inferring psychological insights from such a test. It's also protecting the public in that if this test is on that list, that you should only be getting feedback from a registered psychologist. So the purpose of that list has multiple values. But do note that with the change of mandate, all this list tells us is this test classified or not classified? And even if I do have South Africans on the call, I mean, this change happened quite recently. So sometimes from business, we even hear clients asking, but is the test on the list? And yes, it can be on the list. It can be classified as a psychological test, but that alone is not enough anymore. Like I'm saying, in the past, this HPCSA, they used to classify and evaluate, but with the change, they only classify, which puts more onus now on more responsibility on the practitioner, on these people who are registered with the HPCSA, to ensure that the tests meet those evaluation criteria. And again, thank you to bodies like ITC. We have the FBA standards, we have the BPS standards. As a psychologist in South Africa, you have to understand statistics. You have to understand what reliability, validity, what norm to use when, what the processes of creating norms is. But sometimes, practitioners get so involved in practicing that they don't always think about the stats. They should, but it's sometimes overlooked. And with that, there was a need for a body very similar to the BPS or the FBuzz type of review model to actually formulate in South Africa. And that's where Assessment Standards South Africa came in. They do a voluntary review of assessments. It's not limited to psychometrics. So any technical assessment or any assessment that you want to submit for evaluation, you can. The review process is very transparent in that you can go onto Assessment Standards website and actually see the criteria on which your assessment will be reviewed. It is very, very similar to the FBA model for those who are familiar with the model. In fact, if you do go onto ASSA's website and look at their model, we focus very specifically on the reliability, validity, fairness, and norms of an assessment, purely because our Employment Equity Act says that if you are using assessments to hire, select, develop an employee, it needs to show those criteria, which is why ASSA focuses on that. But they do make mention in many cases that this is actually the same criteria that the FBA model section 4.1.2, for example, also asks. So it's very clear that they've almost simplified or localized almost the FBA module for the South African context specifically. So where profession, law, and global standards meet is that the need is that we are using quality assessments to not harm our people. From a profession perspective, we have Form 207. So as a practitioner registered with this council, you can go look at that form and see, is this assessment on that list or not? If it's not, then it's not recognized as a psychological test. If it is, then I have to be a psychologist to use that. So if somebody who's not a psychologist is using it, they are breaking the law. From a country perspective, we have many laws, such as the Health Professions Act, Employment Equity Act, even our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, indicate that whatever procedures we are using when dealing with a fellow human being, especially in an employment perspective or selection criteria, that must be reliable, valid, and fair, so that we are protecting our citizens, because a lot of harm has been done, not only in our country, worldwide, with assessments. And then, you know what, as a South African citizen working in this field, of course, sometimes we definitely do also look at the ITC, at APA, BPS, FBA. If for whatever reason we can't find our own local legislation, for example, AI, we are still working on the HPCSA. It's drafted, but we haven't yet actually published those AI standards. For now, we have been looking a lot at APA, ITC's guidelines to just help us while we finalize our own. Implications and concerns then with this way of working, because you have HPCSA, that is a statutory body. You have ASSA as well, who are voluntary, so people don't have to submit to them. There are a few concerns, but indications as well. So as a publisher, if you are working for a test developer or a test publisher, legally it is your job and it required of you that you submit your tests to HPCSA to classify as psychological. But that doesn't mean that you have to submit it to ASSA. So getting those quality reviews is optional. And as a test publisher, your responsibility also kind of ends there. As long as it's submitted legally, that is fine. Whether or not it's a good test with good reliability, good validity, many test publishers sometimes leave that. They all say, yes, it's a good test, but they sometimes leave that up to the practitioner, the end user, to decide. For the practitioner, you might be using a classified test because for the longest of time, we have been told that you have to look at that form 207. If it's a psychological test, you can use it. And that's where the thinking stops. We don't always open up the technical manuals and check that this assessment works for our people, for our context. Sometimes, you know what, it might be reliable and valid for general South Africa, but is it working for that specific candidate, for that specific context that you are working in? I'm not always sure that practitioners always think that through. As a policymaker, so more from a legal government perspective, I mean, there are already various laws. I covered some of them that clearly require fairness, but enforcing that only fair procedures are used also, again, relies on the practitioner to understand those psychometric properties. And if the practitioner is only saying, well, I'm using it because it's classified, there can be a gap in understanding. And then for the public, that risk is also there that they're using a classified test. Yes, they're going to a psychologist to get feedback on this classified test, but the onus of checking this quality, the public can't do that. The policymakers aren't going to do that. It is up to the practitioners. And because test publishers aren't forced, and they will never be forced, to send it for quality review, there is a little bit of risk, especially in high stakes contexts, because we have had a few instances, not many, but a few, where it is classified as a psychological test years ago, but it's not relooked. That test isn't relooked, and with time, then norms become outdated. It's maybe not as reliable and valid anymore as things change, as the assessment also goes under revisions. Lastly, challenges and opportunities. So like many others, and I mean, I think any country in the world, we're not only one nationality that all speak one language anymore. We all mixing cultures, which is so beautiful. But like many others, South Africa is facing many challenges from a technological perspective, a socioeconomic perspective. Access is not equal. Nowhere in the world is it equal, but I think it's quite prevalent in South Africa, where not everybody receives the same quality of education. Some people don't even finish school altogether. Again, because of this divide, some people can go on AI and are comfortable with AI. Some people aren't even computer literate. They've never used a laptop. They've never used a cell phone. And other resources is also uneven. So the value of regulatory frameworks, it's valuable for psychological testing. It's essential because things like fairness, accessibility, cultural appropriateness, that's not an abstract. That's not a nice to have. That's not a I wish things would work fairly. It's a reality that we all need to work together. We need to design tests that actually support that contribute for that. And yes, I'm sitting in South Africa, but when I am developing a test, I am trying to make it as culture neutral as possible, trying to use as easy language as possible because, well, one, in South Africa, I have so many people speaking so many languages that my high level English might not be understood by all. But I think from a business perspective, we're all wanting to export our assessments. So you wanting, we're at a point where, with the beauty of AI and technology, where we can have our assessments that we are developing in our countries become a global international hit. But with that in mind, when we're developing tests, when we're constructing, when we're looking at the theory that we are using, we also need to ensure that it will work across various boundaries, various categories. So therefore, as professionals, I think we need to lead the change. Nobody's going to do it for us. We're on this call, we're interested in it, and we need to just be aware of our limitations, be sensitive of cultures, be sensitive of languages, be considerate that when we are adapting things, that yes, you know what, my English is not necessarily the same as Ariela's English. It's not the same as someone in Britain. It's not the same as someone in America. Our level of English understanding, for example, might not be the same. And a word, even, just because it's in English and we all understand English, that meaning of that word might change in context. But I know people on the school are aware of that. But just, again, let's continue to be mindful. Also, sometimes it's important to recognize that a bad test is a bad test, independent of context, because sometimes we've seen it in South Africa that, you know what, a test appears to work in one country and then it gets imported into South Africa, and then we see that it doesn't work, and we blame our context. We say, yes, you know what, as South Africa, I mean, I've spoken a lot about South Africa's challenges, and we say, you know what, that's why it doesn't work in South Africa. And then we check, but it doesn't work in Zambia either, and it doesn't work in Mozambique either, and it doesn't work in Botswana either. And then when you look at the source country, actually look at that technical supplement, sometimes that theory is poor, the stats was poor from the start. So sometimes we mustn't blame the context, we mustn't blame the people. We sometimes do just have to say that was a bad test, let's scrap the test. So hopefully, very quickly, I shared a case study of some of the benefits and limitations of sharing or decoupling or merging classification and quality assurance. So, you know, South Africa, we keep them separate for now. Regulations and policies as a whole, I think a big learning is that even if you're just working in a single company, your policies must balance what's legally required, what profession is going to take what responsibility, and then the scientific standards. And everybody needs to be clear what those scientific standards are. Those scientific standards must be met and not just be seen as a mere tick box exercise. Okay, it's reliable. What does that reliability coefficient actually mean for your people? Are you actually making a difference with this test? And I'm going to hand over to a Brazilian representative who's actually going to talk about the centralized regulatory review, and then we'll close after that. Thanks, Philippe.
Okay, thank you so much, Pakeezah, for your lovely presentation. And now we continue with Dr. Ariela Lima Costa. She is a research and clinical psychologist and psychometrician specializing in aggressive behavior, personality, psychology, and development validation of psychological assessment. Since 2022, she has been a professor in a graduate program in psychology at University of San Francisco, the same program that I'm a professor to. She also serves on editorial boards of Personality Science Journal and also Psycho USF, the journal of our program here in Brazil. Thank you so much, Ariela, for being being here today and agreeing put this webinar on your schedule. It's a great pleasure to receive you here to speak about the Brazilian system of regulatory psychology tests.
Thank you, Philippe, for the invitation. Thank you, Pakeezah, for the presentation. I think you did a very good introduction, especially giving a global perspective about this is the evaluation systems. So today we will focus specifically on the Brazilian psychological test evaluation system. I noticed a lot of similarities between the South African and the Brazilian system. So let's start with a little bit of history also. So in Brazil, we have the system to assess the quality of the instruments. So which instrument the psychologist can use in the practice. And it's not a recommendation of a council. The professionals, they are bound to follow these guidelines. They have to. If they don't follow these guidelines, these regulations, they can suffer ethical sanctions. So it's not an option to not look at this list of instruments that are available, that are favorable to be used in our practice. In the same way as in South Africa, also the profession must be, they have to be a number at the council. They must be registered in our council to be able to use this instrument in their practice. So why what's necessary? I think it's necessary everywhere so we can maintain the quality. But here in Brazil, contextualize why in Brazil we needed a system and we made it bound by law. Because until late 90s here in Brazil, we have a lot of things that was exported from United States, from Europe. So even the way we teach psychology in Brazil was not necessarily a Brazilian way, was not necessarily considering the Brazilian context. And the psychological assessment was a synonymous of test application. So there wasn't a process of evaluation, was a just a technical moment that you apply the test and then you gather some conclusions with the results of those tests. So it was very careless regarding the technical quality. Most of the instruments was just translated. They were not adapted for Brazilian context. We didn't have most of these instruments did not have Brazilian sample norms. So our kids, our adolescents, our adults, and elderly, they were answering those psychological tests and they were being compared with our populations from other countries with a complete different cultural background, a complete different educational background. So it was a problem. And was also a problem because the general population was like losing faith in our profession because they were associating the psychology as test applicators. So it was very a chaos. And in this case, of course, we had a lot of professionals also who did the right thing, who actually did psychological assessment, who were actually worried about the psychometric qualities, and was these professionals. So they have like this call. They need like, okay, it's not working the way it is. We need to change the scenery. We need to provide more quality assessment for the population. So for that, this call for community started like in the late 90s and like in about 2000, they started to reunite it. And in 2003, they launched the regulation. And in this regulation, they established a commission of experts so they could systematically analyze whether these tests used for diagnostic purpose allowed the interpretation of the results obtained from the user. So it's not when this regulation came up was like a cleanup on the list of the tests we had available. A lot of tests like was not more allowed to be used, was very a new chaos because people didn't know what to do because they were very adapted to use those instruments without any concern regarding the psychometric qualities. So this regulation, and then they created, when it was reviewed, also this regulation in 2022, and it's called Sistema de Avaliação de Testes Psicológicos, or SATEPSI, or Psychological Test Evaluation System. So I will, from now on, I will say SATEPSI. You know what I'm referring to. We are referring to our system. So the purpose of SATEPSI is to gather a lot of experts in psychometric in test creation, in test adaptation, not just the translation. So they can access the instruments that will be only available for psychologists. So it's not any professional that can use these instruments that are assessed by this commission. So they created this commission we call CCAP, and this commission has not only the function of regulating the quality of those instruments, but they also have the function of provide support for a council when they have like ethical procedure about the use of the specific test. They also are responsible for conducting the discussions about the psychological assessment area. They provide guidelines, booklets about the psychological assessment in specific context and the general context, so the public have more and more information. There are following international guidelines, national guidelines. So we are always trying to make a conversation between what international guidelines and what we see that really works here in Brazil, but without ignoring the necessity of quality measures. So the CCAP will issue opinions in response to requests of the plenary of the Federal Council of Psychology regarding psychological evaluation, but they don't do comments on any specific case unless it's in an ethical issue, so they are required to do it. Preparing provides updates to the council, so they are always providing updates about these regulations. Since we have this update, like this regulation of 2003 was updated in 2022. Conduct the evaluation process of the instruments submitted to SATEPSI, discuss and provide inputs to the council and support action with the scope of psychological assessment and guide the psychologists and the public on the standards related to psychological evaluation. So any person, not necessarily a professional, can have access to this commission and ask questions about the psychological process evaluation. They can have the question about some instrument that is used by a professional that they are going, so they have they are open for the public, not just for the professionals. And the professionals who does this evaluation, they also goes through a public call to be chosen. So we have this commission that is elected by the council. It's a commission of experts, but this commission doesn't work alone. They work with another reviewers, like in the same process that we do on scientific journals. So we have ad hoc assessment, but it's just one blind assessment. So I am an ad hoc reviewer of the SATEPSI. So when I receive an instrument to assess, I know who is the author of the instrument, but the author doesn't know that I did the review. So it's one blinded only. So how to choose those reviewers? It's not random. We have a public call for proposals. So they launch this public call. And for people become ad hoc reviews on the SATEPSI. So the calls aims to select a review on the ad hoc basis to form this pool of reviews. So they know to whom to send that test that was submitted for people to assess. But it's not any psychologist that can be part of this board of reviews. So the prerequisites for this position includes you have a degree in psychology, of course, recognized by our Minister of Education. You need to have a doctor in psychology or related field recognized by our Ministry of Education also. And you need to have at least 5 articles published in the last 5 years. And these articles cannot be any articles. These articles must be related to the field of psychological assessment or fundamental and measures in psychology. So they are making sure that the people that will assess this instrument, they know what they are talking about. It's not, you have to know about psychometric, you have to know the psychological assessment. So you are able to assess an instrument that will be used in a psychological process assessment. So it's very, you send your application, then you go and they assess you, they review your curriculum, and then you can be or not be accepted as a Red Rock review. So it's a very, but it's public, the list of the reviews. So anyone can access the website of the council and know who composed this pool of Red Rock reviewers. So the process is basically very similar to like I said, to the scientific journals. So if you want, it is not obliged. People are not obliged to submit every test to the commission, because not everyone wants their test to be exclusive for psychologists. Some people want their test to be used for another professionals. So you are not obliged to submit to commission, but once you submit and once it's approved, only psychologists can use it for the diagnostic purpose. So you submit the manual, you submit the stimulus, you submit everything that is necessary for the reviewer to understand how you're gonna assess a specific construct. This document goes to the commission. The commission selects 2 ad hoc reviews. They do independent reviews, and then the commission writes a report based on the assessment of these reviews, and they made a decision in group. It's not just one person. They have monthly meetings to decide, to discuss about these documents. So they can refuse as a psychological test to understand that the construct is not a psychological measure that can be open to anyone. They can approve without any modifications, and they can send it back to the authors and require revisions. So once it's approved, it can be approved in 3 levels. You can be approved in level A+, that is excellence. You can be approved in level A, that is means good, and level B, that is sufficient. In level C, it's refused, it's reproved. So what determines if it's level A+, A, or B is the psychometric quality and the sample distribution. Because like I think it's in every country, we have a lot of difference, cultural difference. Here in Brazil specifically, Brazil is divided in 5 regions, and each region usually has a lot of cultural difference regarding how people interact with the others, regarding the kind of the quality of the education. So because we have this many difference among Brazil inside Brazil, one of the criteria of the commission is that every manual have a simple representative of the 5 regions. So if you have like the 5 regions, that is really good. But so it will contribute to you receive A+ approved measure. So these are how you can be approved. So in Brazil, most of the approved tests are about personality, intelligence, and attention. And why these three constructs have the most number of tests? Because mostly of these constructs are used in compulsory evaluation. So here in Brazil, I think is people from other countries find it a little bit weird, but we have a compulsory evaluation for driver license. So you cannot have your driver license unless it goes through a psychological evaluation. And also, I have my driver license, now I want to work as a driver, you need another psychological evaluation to work professionally, for weapon permits and for public service exam. So unlike in other countries, here in Brazil, the judges, for example, from the civil court, from the penal court, they are not appointed by someone. They have to go through a process, a public exam, and one of the steps of this exam is a psychological assessment. So for police officers, judge, teachers, almost every single public service, you have to go from a compulsory evaluation, and mostly we assess personality, intelligence, and attention. And of course, we have some specific, but mostly these three constructs. So here is how people, I will see now, how people see the website of the SATEPSI. They can go, it's public for consultation. People can look for by naming, by the author, by the publisher, by the kind of construct they want to see the instrument. So the attention, social conducts, as competences, personality. So you choose it. You'll see now an example of what kind of information people have in the public. So you can see the author. I chose here the new FFI because it's mostly known for everyone. So you can see the authors, the publisher, which construct it assess, which public you can use that instrument, how is the application, if you apply with one person, if you can apply in public, and how you can correct it, if you can correct using only the manual or computerized correction. And then you have the approval date, so when this test was approved by the commission. And then we have two different deadlines, one for the standardization, the others for the validation evidences. So it's not like once it's approved by the commission, it's approved forever. No. Every 15 years, the authors has to send new evidence, new validation evidence. They have to send new norms. So here, for an example, you can see that the new FFI is they have the standardization studies valid until 11 March of 2038, and the validation studies is valid until 11 April of 2028. So if the psychologists use this instrument after this date, it cannot. It will be an ethical contradiction. You cannot use it. So here today, we have like 117 tests approved in Brazil. It's very little. I know it's not that much instrument, but it's mainly because of this cleanup that SATEPSI had made. We have a lot of more instruments available in Brazil than that, but these are the one that is on the list of SATEPSI that is can be used exclusively by psychologists. We have 232 tests disapproved because of psychometric concerns. And we have today 70 tests under evaluations. And also the good thing about SATEPSI is they forced Brazilian research to do our own instruments. So we have a lot of instruments that now that it's made by Brazilians for Brazilian sample that consider Brazilian context, and not just instruments that are being adapted from other countries. So it's a very good winning for us in Brazil with the SATEPSI when it was created. Because people like, okay, it's easier, I do one for us, they adapt another instrument. So this is very nice. And then we have, like I say, just for you to know, we have like the practical guide for preparing and submitting tests for SATEPSI. So the authors can have this booklet about which kind of information they must provide and what the topics the manuals must have. So like summary sheet, theoretical basis, studies of validance and accuracy estimations, description of the materials, application instructions, correction and interpretation, standardization studies and tables, and case examples. And also, like I said, the commission is not just about regulating the instrument, but also about teaching how to do a good assessment. So here an example, they have like the latest version of the guidance booklet for professional practice. This one is the general one, but we have a lot of other booklets for specific areas. So we have for the weapon permit, for the driver's license, we have booklets for specific assessment as well. So that's it. I hope you now understand a little bit more how we do it here in Brazil. Of course, we have a lot of work to do, but I think now we are in a good path. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariela, again for your lovely presentation. I was very interesting to see the differences and similarities between South Africa and Brazil in terms of system, right? And now we have some open time for questions. We do have some questions that came from our pre-registration form. We selected some of them, and I ask you, Ariela and Pakeezah. And we also have some questions from the audience today. But first of all, I'd like to address one question from that is for myself, for you both, for Ariela and Pakeezah. So it's first question is will be mine. I mean, as far as I understand about the regulation of testing, it's just to guarantee the minimum quality for assessment for the examinees. At the end of the day, the main purpose is to guarantee fairness assessment for every participant, for every examinee. This is the main reason for every regulations in terms of testing. And to do that, we know that there are out there very different systems and different approaches, and you show us and quite some differences between South Africa and Brazil as well. But I can summarize them in two main areas of the regulations. One is focused more on the quality assessment, I would say, that the regulatory bureau is more concerned about to do a very, very specific assessment in terms of quality and publicize it, the quality, but there's no restriction of the use of the test. And the other approach is the regulatory in terms of the mandatory testing that you should use or you should not use, right? So one is more focus on quality assessment, one more for focus on the regulatory test that people should use or not. And I'd like to ask you both, how do you classify the Brazilian and South Africa system and this differences approaches, and how do you see what you think is should be better or should be applied more in your countries?
You
Go
can
first.
answer first, Pakeezah.
Okay. Yeah. So in South Africa, yes, we have both, and I think that causes a lot of confusion for practitioners and the public because I think most South Africans know about the law and our regulations. So that HPCSA list, we get a lot of I mean I don't work for them and I get a lot of questions about that list. So at least I think there is more awareness that this is a psychological test and it's therefore limited to only psychologists can use it, which is helpful. But then it's assumed that that list means quality.
Yeah.
Slowly, assessment standard South Africa is gaining a lot more visibility in our country. So people are starting to ask about quality, but then they need to look at a different list, which is extra work. So I think a recommendation for some of the test distributors, both from a mandatory legal perspective and from assessment standards, if you are submitting, both of them give you certificates. So just make everybody's lives a little bit easier and add those two certificates to your manual. So it's a little bit easier to do all the checks before you use it.
Thank you.
Here in Brazil, it's mandatory to use the list, but we also have some flexibility. And I think since considering that psychometric knowledge, it's not so open. It's not people doesn't understand that much. Even the professional, even though we have this class in undergraduations, I think it's necessary to guarantee the minimum quality because when we do the reviews, like when I receive a task to do review, we have this forum that we have to access each aspect of the validation stuff. Some of them are more qualitative, others are more quantitative. So, for example, the precision measure, the test has to have at least 0.660 to be considered minimal good. So I think it's good because not all the clinical psychologists will have the full knowledge to choose an appropriate instrument. They can be convinced by others, like who's trying to sell their test without really knowledge about the psychometric values, and not for bad, but because of the lack of enough knowledge, can do a bad choice about instruments. So I think it's a good measure. But here in Brazil, also we have some flexibility because in our regulation, we have what we call complement instruments that you can use other instruments that is not on the list if you can justify them scientifically. So you have to prove with articles, scientific articles, that they really, it's minimal good. So you can also do that, but you cannot call them a psychological test.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Ariela and Pakeezah, for your answers. And one more question, very quickly. One is that you both said that your systems in Brazil and South Africa do have assess quality of the assessment of the test, but this assessment is publicized in terms of they turn public those quality tests for the broad audience. Everyone can enter in the system and check if the test is quality, how it was assessed, and if it's good or not, or in terms of the quality of validity, reliability, and the norms. That's my last question. How it is public the assessment of the test.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously the items, the test integrity isn't there, but both of that. If you go on HPCSA's website, you can see what assessments are classified. If you go on Assessment Standard South Africa, you can see which assessments passed the evaluation. You won't see all the submissions, and if it didn't fail, if it failed, then they won't show it on the website. But that is the nice thing, that if it has passed, it is public. But again, I don't know if all the public know to go check.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, here in Brazil is also public, and you can see which one is under evaluation, which one it's approved, which one is unfavorable. You cannot use it, but you do not have specific information about the form that reviews do. You don't have access to the report of the commission rights. You only have the information that, okay, you can use it, it's available to be used legally, or you cannot use it legally. I actually yesterday we have one of the professors in our university, Professor Evandro, is the president of the commission in SATEPSI, and I was actually talked to him about it, and I was like, oh, you should have like the specifics, so the validation students A plus, A, B, what, so I can do like a more conscious choice about my instruments. So I was like giving this asking him to update more the website so you have more specific information and do more conscious choice.
All right, thank you, Ariela. And now we have some questions from the audience as well. Karina asked, told us, thank you for the insightful presentation. And she also asked, what trends do you see in the test quality regulations with the rise of the digital and online assessments? It's a good question.
A very good question. I think for me, even if it's not a quality, it needs to be very clear to the professional whether AI is being used in scoring the assessment or whether the assessment must be proctored. I mean, electronic online assessments have been around for many years now, even in South Africa. And in the past 2-3 years, we have so many practitioners. I mean, the assessment has it's on the HPCSA list, so it's classified as psychological. It went through the assessment quality thing, and then practitioners still ask us, but this test, how have you safeguarded it against AI? And for me, that is such a weird question, because if you are in any case measuring someone's cognition or intelligence or aptitude, that should be proctored. That should be a supervised administration. AI isn't new in that sense. I mean, if your candidates are going to cheat with AI, they could have cheated with Google. So I think it is maybe important that from a quality or from a regulation perspective, that we make it clear and put emphasis on both the test taker, but then also the professional, that look, especially with your cognitive assessments or assessments that you're worried about cheating, that it must be supervised or proctored in some way.
I see when I think about the test quality on digital analysis assessment, it's not exactly I don't think it's going to be a problem when we think about the Brazilian system, because we already have a lot of instruments that can be answered online. You only have to follow all the procedure. You have to prove it how it is done. So I think our form kind of already takes accounts if it's used online or pencil and paper. What I think we need have more discussion about, it's when this assessment is done completely online. So I'm here as the psychologist and my clients, and another side of the screen, how am I going to perform, for example, an intelligence test that I need a performance when I need to access motor abilities. So this can be a problem. I think we need more discussion about it. And we're gonna have to bring back like when we in the past we have a lot of studies comparing tests that was applied online and tests that were applied in pencil and paper, and we didn't find any difference. Now I think we have to return a little bit more that, because we have a lot of other instruments, other tools to the online application, and to see how it will work with this new and digital environment.
Thank you, Ariela, for your question. Now, I will put one question from the register members. What is the general principle for ensuring test quality across different countries and cultures? How can this be done without disadvantaging countries with less developed psychometric research?
I think, I mean, from a South African perspective, now that you know our history, the basics still apply. Even if you are coming from a disadvantaged background, or if you have different cultures and reliability, the internal consistency coefficient is that. Your differential item functioning shows you that. I don't think we need to necessarily come up with different techniques. The techniques that we are using to show reliability, validity, fairness, those are strong, that they statistically sound. What I do think is that in those disadvantaged countries, that we do try to create that interest and that passion in practitioners, or that if you are a little bit more resourced and have the funding to help create that research in those local contexts.
Yeah, I think because the technique is not gonna be different if it's more depend on the country. I think we need rely a little bit more international guidelines if you don't have your own. So like here in the SATEPSI, we rely also on international guidelines. We don't disregard them. And I think it would be nice to go back to these guidelines to try to follow at least the minimum, right? I think sometimes you cannot have the goal for the perfection, but the goal that what is possible to do. So see what among the possibilities, what it's possible to do to offer the minimal quality. I think, and then the professional will do the difference when they are doing the report, when they are doing the psychological reports. The professional will do a lot of more difference than an instrument, right? Because in psychological assessment, it's not just the test, it's the interview, the observation. We have a lot of others ways to do the psychological assessment, even without instruments, right? So I think it's assess what do I have, minimal quality, what are my possibilities, and try to work with them the way it's possible, and rely on international guidelines when it's possible.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. We're almost running out of time, but I guess we still have a little time for one last question. As Sergio Araneda asked a great presentation. Question for both presenters so far. Do you see feasible to extend those regulations to educational testing? This is a very nice one.
It's a very nice one. Thanks for that question. Uh, Yes, I think so. In our country, we have far more teachers than psychologists, and I think it would be nice if more teachers could have access to quality assessments that identify learning disabilities or things that adolescents struggle with, like developmental struggles. It would be helpful if there were regulations to help them with that. I think from a pure regulation perspective. In South Africa, we do so. If you need concession testing, or if you have dyslexia or a learning disorder, there are regulations in place that, again, the psychologist, normally a educational psychologist, would need to write a report for the school, so that the school is aware of it. And the nice thing is, I know it's not a regulation, but Assessment Standards South Africa, they can check, like, if you submit to them, they can evaluate reliability, validity of any assessment. It doesn't have to be psychological. So they are open to evaluating educational assessments.
For me, it's super feasible. I think it should be a reality. Here in Brazil, I think a little more distant from that reality, because most of our research in education field is they are more qualitative, they are more I think more like concerned about the individuality, how the inclusion of the students, despite we have a lot of educational professionals that do some assessments, right? But I think it's super feasible, especially when we consider the standards. The standards is not just for psychological, it's just also for the educational system, right? So it would be really nice to have this and guarantee more quality on these assessments, so you don't use any kind of instruments, that it's not reviewed by peers, it's not following minimal guidelines of quality. It's feasible, but I don't know in the other countries. But if here in Brazil, we are a little bit more distant of that. I hope you can come closer to that at some point. But it's feasible. I was about to talk in Portuguese.
All right, no problem. Yeah, thank you so much, Ariela and Pakeezah, again for being here today. It's a great pleasure. And again, Pakeezah and Ariela, they are part of the ITC program for the young career, and they are awarded for the last early career program. And thank you again for the all people that are watching this webinar. And stay tuned for the next webinar, which should be at the ending of September. So thank you so much for being this afternoon or night. Thank you and see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.